Get that woman off my outpost now. Mitchell grabbed her rifle case and threw it into the mud, right there, in front of every man at Black Ridge Outpost. He grabbed her rifle case, the one thing a sniper protects more than her own life, and he hurled it into the Montana mud like it was garbage. Send it back, he said. I don't babysit. 32 soldiers watched. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Olivia looked at the mud. Then she looked at Mitchell. She picked up her case slowly, wiped it clean with her sleeve, and said 4 words that nobody at Black Ridge ever forgot. You'll need me tonight. Mitchell laughed. He was still laughing 6 hours later, right up until the moment the first explosion tore through the eastern wall, and he realized, with everything collapsing around him, that she had been right about every single thing. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next at Black Ridge Outpost is something none of those soldiers ever forgot for the rest of their lives. The helicopter came in low over the mountains, blades cutting through the cold Montana air like a blade through silence, and every man at Black Ridge Outpost stopped what he was doing to watch it land. 32 soldiers, 32 sets of eyes, all fixed on that cargo door. They had been waiting 3 days for this moment. 3 days of whispered conversations, of rumors passed between bunks, of men checking their weapons twice and then checking them a third time because the threat assessment had shifted and nobody was saying exactly what kind of shift it was. The word had come down from command. Reinforcement was on the way. A specialist. Someone hand-picked. Someone who had seen things in theaters of operation that most of these soldiers had only read about in briefings. Staff Sergeant Joel Brennan, a 12-year veteran with a chest full of ribbons and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same granite as the mountains surrounding them, had put it simply the night before, whoever they're sending us, he better be the real thing. Because I've seen what's moving out there in those hills at night, and whatever it is, it ain't tourists. Every man had nodded. Every man had their own version of what the real thing looked like. Big, weathered. The kind of face that had absorbed enough hostility from enough corners of the world that it had stopped reacting to anything. Combat boots that looked like they had walked across half the continents of the earth. Arms like bridge cables. Eyes that saw through walls. That was what they were expecting when that cargo door swung open. That was what 32 soldiers were holding their breath for. And then the door opened, and Captain Olivia Carter stepped out. She was 29 years old, 5 feet 8 inches of quiet, compressed precision, carrying nothing but a rifle case in her left hand and a small pack on her back. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was neutral in a way that wasn't cold, it was simply focused, the way a surgeon's face goes neutral the moment she walks into an operating room. Not distant, not already working. She stepped onto Montana soil, took one breath of the mountain air, and her eyes moved immediately not to the soldiers watching her, not to the outpost itself, but to the ridgeline to the northeast. 3 seconds, 4. She held her gaze there like someone reading a sentence in a language the rest of them didn't speak. Then she looked at the men. She already knew what they were thinking. She had seen that look in 17 different countries. She had seen it in the eyes of generals and corporals and everyone in between. She had learned to read it the way a weatherman reads clouds, not with anger, not with fear, but with the calm, practiced recognition of someone who understands that this particular storm always comes before the real one. Sergeant Ryan Mitchell walked forward. He was broad-shouldered, 34 years old, and he carried himself with the specific confidence of someone who had never been wrong in front of his men, or at least had never admitted it. He had 8 years at Black Ridge. He knew every rock, every trail, every angle of every mountain within visual range. He had built the defensive position on the eastern wall with his own hands. He had trained the men on rotational watch schedules that he would have staked his life on. He looked at Olivia, and he laughed. It wasn't a small laugh. It wasn't a private laugh between two people who shared a joke. It was a performance, a declaration. He turned his head slightly so the men behind him could see his face, and he let the laughter carry. And he said it, the words that would follow him for the rest of his career, the words that would eventually be written into the official after-action report of a battle that nearly destroyed everything at Black Ridge. She's our reinforcement? Some of the men shifted. A few looked away. Corporal Danny Vega, 22 years old, and on his first extended deployment, felt something uncomfortable move through him, but said nothing because Ryan Mitchell was the kind of man whose approval you didn't risk lightly. Private First Class Aiden Cross, standing near the supply shed, actually took a small step backward as if trying to quietly distance himself from what was happening. He had a sister back in Ohio who had been fighting for years to get into a field she kept being told wasn't for her. And something about this moment made his chest feel tight in a way he couldn't immediately name. But most of the men just watched, waiting to see how she would respond. Olivia looked at Mitchell. She didn't flinch. She didn't redden. She didn't set her jaw or shift her weight or do any of the things that people do when they're trying very hard not to show that something has landed. She simply looked at him with those calm, already working eyes and said, in a voice that was completely conversational, "Where's Major Reeves?" That was it. That was all. Mitchell blinked. He had expected something, a protest, a flash of anger, some sign that the shot had hit. He had aimed that laugh like a weapon, and she had walked through it like it was a curtain of smoke. "Up front," he said after a pause that was one beat too long. "Thank you," Olivia said, and she walked past him. She walked past 32 men, none of whom said a word, her boots steady on the ground, her eyes already moving again across the outpost layout, across the positioning of the watch posts, across the angles of the surrounding terrain, taking everything in with the systematic efficiency of someone conducting an assessment they had been conducting in their head since before the helicopter lifted off. She found Major Daniel Reeves in the command room, which was really just the largest interior space in the outpost, with a map table at the center and radio equipment along one wall. Reeves was a careful man, 41 years old, with dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that he took off and cleaned whenever he was thinking hard about something, which was often. He had the kind of steady competence that came not from brilliance, but from discipline, from doing every step of every process correctly every single time, and trusting that the accumulation of correct steps eventually produced correct outcomes. He had read Olivia's file. He had read it twice. He was not the kind of man who laughed. "Captain Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Black Ridge." Sir, she shook it. Firm. Direct. "How long has the civilian movement pattern on the North Road been abnormal?" Reeves paused. He set his glasses down on the map table. "What?" "The North Road," she said again, moving to the map. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She put her finger on the map and traced the road that ran parallel to the northern ridge, the one that connected 3 small settlements to the market town 15 miles east. "Civilian traffic on this road, how long has it been below normal?" Reeves frowned. "I don't have that specific data. I need to talk to whoever's been doing the morning observation reports." That would be Sergeant Mitchell. There was a silence. "Of course it would," Olivia said quietly, but not sarcastically, just noting it. "The way you note a particular kind of weather." Reeves studied her. There was something in her manner, not aggression, not arrogance, but a quality of absolute certainty that he had only encountered a handful of times in 2 decades of military service. The certainty of someone who has already calculated the variables and arrived at an answer that the rest of the room hasn't found yet. "What are you seeing?" he asked. She looked at him. "I'm not seeing it yet," she said. "I'm not seeing anything yet, because I've been on the ground for 18 minutes. But I noticed something from the air, coming in. The northeast ridge." She pointed. "There's a promontory position up there, do you see it? That has clear sight lines over your eastern defensive wall, your generator building, and your primary communications antenna. All 3 in the same firing arc, from roughly 1,200 meters. Reeves put his glasses back on and leaned over the map. "We've assessed that position," he said. "It's considered low probability. The approach is difficult. Any enemy element would have to move at night," Olivia said, "in small groups, over 3 or 4 nights, establishing a forward position that looks, from your observation posts, like nothing at all. Because from your observation posts, you can't see the backside of that promontory, only the face of it, and the face of it looks empty." The room was quiet. Reeves looked at the map for a long time. "That's a significant assessment," he said finally, "based on a helicopter approach and 18 minutes on the ground." "Yes, sir," she said. "I know." She wasn't being combative. She was simply being accurate. And the accuracy itself was its own kind of pressure, the quiet, sticky pressure of a truth that doesn't need to shout because it's already true whether anyone acknowledges it or not. "I'd like to set up an observation position with sightlines to that promontory," she said. "I'd like to do it tonight." and I'd like to request access to the last 2 weeks of morning observation logs. Reeves nodded slowly. I'll arrange both. But Captain, I want to be clear. The official threat assessment for this sector is low. I'm not going to restructure our defensive posture based on. I understand, sir, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking to watch. He nodded. Watch, he said. That's approved. She thanked him, picked up her rifle case, and walked back out into the cold Montana air. Mitchell was waiting by the door. He had posted himself there, which was not exactly subtle, and his arms were crossed over his chest in the posture of a man who has decided that a conversation is going to happen whether the other person wants it to or not. So you talked to the major, he said. I did. And you're going to set up some kind of observation post? Tonight, yes, because you think you saw something from the helicopter. Olivia stopped walking. She turned and looked at him, really looked at him the way she had looked at that northeast ridge, with that same quality of attention that didn't miss anything. Sergeant Mitchell, she said, how long have you been here? 8 months. And in 8 months, you know this terrain better than anyone. Good, she said. Then you know the northeast ridge, the promontory at 1,200 meters. I know it. Has the civilian traffic on the North Road changed in the last 2 weeks? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't quite certainty anymore. It's been quieter, he said. But that happens. Weather, seasonal pattern. How about vehicle movement at night? Northern approach corridor. Have you seen headlights on that mountain road after midnight? The flicker became something harder to ignore. Not recently, he said. How recently? A pause, maybe 12 days. Olivia nodded. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to say anything. She simply let that pause sit there like a stone in the middle of a river and let him feel the weight of what it meant. That could be anything, he said, but his voice had changed. A degree less certain. It could be, she agreed. And it probably is nothing. And I'm probably going to sit in an observation post all night and see nothing at all and come back in the morning with frost on my jacket and nothing to report. That's probably exactly what's going to happen. But, he said, but if I'm wrong, she said quietly, it costs one uncomfortable night. She let that land. Then she walked away. Mitchell stood there for a moment watching her go. Around him, the outpost continued its businessmen moving between posts, the low hum of the generator, the distant sound of someone testing radio equipment. Everything normal. Everything familiar. He told himself she was wrong. He told himself it 7 more times before dinner. He almost believed it by the 6th. Corporal Danny Vega found her at the equipment room an hour later, checking her rifle with the particular focused care of someone performing a ritual they have performed so many times it has become part of their breathing. He had been sent to get something from the room. He couldn't quite remember what and had stopped in the doorway because he felt like he was watching something private. Not private in a vulnerable way. Private in the way that an athlete is private in those last moments before a competition, when all the noise of the world compresses down to a single point of preparation. Captain, he said. She looked up. He almost backed out of the doorway, but he had started, so he went forward. I'm Corporal Vega, he said. I can show you where the observation supplies are, if you need them. Thermal gear, extended range spotting scope, we've got good equipment. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression softened, not in a way that was patronizing, but in a way that recognized something. She had seen this look before, too. The young soldier who felt the thing everyone else was ignoring. The one who didn't know yet that the feeling was worth trusting. Thank you, Corporal, she said. That would actually be helpful. Show me what you've got. He led her through the equipment room, and she listened carefully to everything he said, asking precise questions. What was the lowest temperature range on the thermal unit? What was the battery life on the spotting scope? Was there a suppressor-compatible mount for her rifle, or would she need to adapt her own? At one point, as he was pulling out a thermal cover from the back shelf, he said quietly, almost under his breath, not really meaning her to hear, I think you might be right, about the ridge. She heard him. She paused. What makes you say that? He shrugged, awkward with it. I did a watch rotation 3 nights ago. I didn't put it in my report because, Sergeant Mitchell reviews all the reports, and I didn't want him to think I was... He stopped. Tried again. I thought I heard something. On the north side. Not a sound I could identify. Just wrong. Like the mountain made a sound it wasn't supposed to make. Olivia looked at him. You didn't report it, she said. Not an accusation. Just a fact. No, he said, and the word had the sound of something he had been carrying. I should have. Yes, she said gently, you should have. But you're telling me now. She picked up the thermal unit and tested its weight. Stay sharp on your next watch rotation. If you hear anything like that again, anything that sounds wrong, you radio me directly. Doesn't matter if it's 3 in the morning. You radio me. Yes, ma'am. He almost left. Then he turned back. Captain, why do you do this? I've read about SEAL snipers and it's always, the people I've read about, they've got all these stories, all this, he stumbled. Why do you do it? She considered the question. She picked up her rifle case. Because someone has to see the thing coming before it arrives, she said. And most people are busy looking somewhere else. She walked past him out into the fading afternoon light. He stood there for a moment, holding the thermal cover. Then he went back to his post. Private First Class Aiden Cross saw her from the eastern wall as she moved to set up her observation position, and something about the way she moved with that absolute unhurried focus, as if the mountains themselves were no obstacle, made him feel something he struggled to articulate to himself. He had grown up in Dayton, Ohio. He had a sister named Marina who was finishing nursing school. Marina always got the same look that he saw on people's faces when they heard that she was going into emergency medicine, that slight squint, that small recalibration, as if the information was trying to fit itself into a space that was already occupied by a different expectation. Marina laughed it off, mostly. But sometimes, late at night, when they had long phone calls the way siblings do when they are far from home, he could hear something underneath the laughter that wasn't quite so light. He watched Captain Carter disappear over the ridge toward her observation position, and he found himself hoping, with a clarity that surprised him, that she was right about everything. He didn't fully understand why it mattered so much to him, but it did. Mitchell, meanwhile, was at the map table with Staff Sergeant Brennan, running through the duty rotation for the next 48 hours. It was a practical conversation, logistics. The kind of conversation Mitchell was very good at, the kind he could conduct with one part of his mind while the other part went somewhere else entirely. What do you think of her? Brennan asked, not looking up from the duty board. Command made a mistake, Mitchell said automatically. Brennan glanced up. She seemed pretty sharp to me. She's been here 6 hours, so? So you can't know this ground in 6 hours, Joel. You know that. It took me 3 months before. I felt like I really understood the angles out there. 3 months of going out in every weather condition, in daylight and at night, learning where the light falls and where it doesn't, learning which ridgelines echo and which ones absorb. Or Brennan said carefully, she's the kind of person who learns in 6 hours what takes most people 3 months. Mitchell looked at him. Brennan shrugged. I'm just saying. Her file isn't exactly nothing. Files are what people write about themselves, Mitchell said, or what their commanding officers write about them, Brennan said. And her commanding officers used a lot of words I don't use about anyone, including me. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. She's going to spend a cold night watching an empty ridge, he said finally. And tomorrow morning, she's going to come back. And she's going to admit that the threat assessment was correct. And we're going to get on with preparing for extraction like we were already doing. Probably, Brennan said, definitely. Brennan nodded slowly, looking back at the duty board. But his pen was still in the air, not quite writing, hovering over the paper like a thought he hadn't finished yet. What? Mitchell said. The North Road, Brennan said. It has been quiet. The pen came down. He wrote the next name on the roster. Mitchell said nothing. He looked at the map. Outside, the Montana night was beginning to gather itself in the valleys, pooling in the low places between the mountains the way water pools in the hollows of stones. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in 20 minutes. The stars appeared one by one, then all at once. In her observation position, Captain Olivia Carter settled in behind her rifle, adjusted the thermal scope, and began to watch the northeast ridge. She was patient in a way that went beyond discipline. It was something closer to a philosophy. Some people experienced waiting as an absence, as time stolen from action, as passive and uncomfortable and wasteful. Olivia experienced it as its own form of work. The most important form sometimes, because the world only revealed its true patterns to people who were willing to be still long enough to see them. She had been 23 years old when she understood this. She had been in a position not unlike this one, in a different country, in a different mountain range, watching a road that everyone else had written off as unimportant. She had watched it for 11 hours. On the 12th hour, she had seen something that changed the course of a mission and saved 9 lives. Her commanding officer afterward had asked her what she saw on the road that made her stay. She had thought about it seriously before answering. Nothing, she'd finally said. That was what I saw. Nothing. And nothing in that particular place, at that particular time, was the most dangerous thing on that entire mountain. He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had nodded. She had never had to explain it again. Now, 6 years later, on a cold Montana ridge at midnight, she made herself absolutely still and watched the northeast promontory through the thermal scope, and she saw the mountain, and she saw the stars, and she saw the particular quality of darkness between the trees on the upper approach trail, a darkness that was not quite the same darkness as the darkness around it. She didn't move, she didn't radio, she just watched, and she waited for the darkness to do what darkness does when it isn't empty. She waited for it to move. Back at the outpost, Mitchell sat awake on his bunk at 1 a.m, which was unusual for him. He was a man who slept soundly, who had trained himself over years to find the off switch with military precision. But tonight the switch wasn't working, and he lay with his arm behind his head and stared at the ceiling and thought about the North Road and the 12 days without headlights and the sound that Corporal Vega had not reported, which he had not known about until Vega had mentioned it to him that evening. Awkwardly, apologetically, clearly braced for a response that, to his own slight surprise, Mitchell had not delivered. He had simply said, "Thanks for telling me now." He had meant it as a rebuke, but it had come out sounding like something else. He turned on his side and tried to sleep. He thought about the promontory. He had assessed it himself back in the first month. He had walked the trail, hiked up to the face of it, looked out from the top, and felt what any sniper worth his training would feel: the recognition of a perfect firing position. He had flagged it in his report. Command had noted it as low probability based on approach difficulty. He had agreed with that assessment. He still agreed with it. He was almost asleep when a thought arrived, quiet and unwelcome, like a sound from a mountain that wasn't supposed to make that sound. Approach difficulty from the front. What about from the back? He opened his eyes. He lay very still for exactly 60 seconds. Then he got up, pulled on his jacket, and walked to the command room. The duty radio operator, Specialist Torres, looked up in surprise. "Sergeant, pull up the terrain map," Mitchell said. "Northeast ridge. Show me the northern approach, the backside of the promontory." Torres blinked, then pulled it up. Mitchell looked at the map. He looked at the backside of the promontory, the side that faced away from Black Ridge Outpost, the side that none of their observation posts could see, the side that would be invisible to every watch rotation he had ever set up. The approach from the backside was not difficult. The approach from the backside was, in fact, almost straightforward. It was only the front that was hard. He stood at the map table for a long time. Then he picked up the radio. "Captain Carter," he said. Static, then calm and clear, with no suggestion of cold or discomfort or 7 hours of lying motionless in the dark. "Mitchell." He paused. He wasn't sure what he had meant to say. "The back approach," he said, "to the promontory. I never assessed it." A silence. "I know," she said. Another silence. "What are you seeing?" he asked. "Nothing yet," she said. But the nothing has been changing shape for the last hour. He didn't know exactly what that meant. But somehow, in the way that certain truths communicate themselves through the space between words, he understood it perfectly. "I'm sending Brennan to the eastern wall," he said. "Just to check good," she said. He started to put the radio down. "Mitchell," her voice came through. "Yeah, thank you for calling." He put the radio down. He stood in the command room for a moment, in the quiet hum of equipment and the faint smell of coffee from Torres's thermos, and he felt something that he was not accustomed to feeling, the particular vertigo of a man who has been very certain about something for a very long time and has just, in the space of 60 seconds, become less certain. It was not a comfortable feeling, but it was, he would think later, one of the most important feelings he had ever had. He went to wake Brennan, and outside, in the dark, on the mountain, Olivia Carter watched the promontory and waited for the nothing to finish becoming something. The temperature dropped 2 more degrees. The stars were very bright, and somewhere on the backside of the northeast ridge, in the darkness that nobody at Black Ridge had ever fully mapped, something that had been waiting for its moment was very quietly, very patiently, beginning to move. Mitchell did not sleep. He had sent Brennan to the eastern wall 20 minutes ago, told him to run a quiet check, nothing official, nothing logged, just a set of experienced eyes on the perimeter, and now he was standing in the command room with a cold cup of coffee in his hand, staring at the terrain map like it owed him an answer. Torres, the duty radio operator, was pretending not to watch him. Torres was good at pretending. 23 years old, from Albuquerque, the kind of young soldier who had learned early that the smartest thing you could do in a room full of senior NCOs was to be invisible until someone needed you. But he had been on duty for 4 hours now, and in those 4 hours he had watched Sergeant Mitchell come in twice, look at the map, leave, come back, look at the map again, and now stand here with that expression, the one Torres had never seen on Mitchell's face before. Not anger, not confidence. Something quieter and more uncomfortable than either. It looked, Torres thought privately, like doubt. Torres, Mitchell said without turning around. The observation logs from the last 14 days. Pull every entry that mentions the northeast quadrant. Yes, Sergeant. Torres turned to his terminal. All of them, or just all of them? Torres pulled the logs. He printed them. He set them on the table next to Mitchell's untouched coffee, and then he went back to being invisible. Mitchell read. He read slowly and carefully, the way he did everything with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had built his reputation on never missing details. Except now, reading these logs that he himself had reviewed and approved over 14 days, he was looking for the detail he had missed. And the thing about looking for the thing you missed is that once you're looking for it, you find it everywhere. Day 1, observation post 2 notes, reduced civilian vehicle activity on North Approach Road. Assessment seasonal variation. Day 4. Post 3 notes, absence of livestock movement in northern grazing area. Assessment, cold weather keeping animals closer to settlements. Day 7, post 2 notes, no observed night movement in northern corridor for 6th consecutive night. Assessment, consistent with low threat environment. Day 11, post 3 notes, unusual bird behavior in upper northeast tree line, citing multiple species vacating area simultaneously. No assessment provided. Filed under miscellaneous. Mitchell set the logs down. He picked up the one from day 11 again. Unusual bird behavior in upper northeast tree line, multiple species vacating simultaneously. That entry had been filed by Corporal Vega. Mitchell had reviewed it and marked it miscellaneous without a second thought, because that was exactly what it was, a kid filing a report about birds because he didn't know what else to haul what he had observed. Birds flushing from trees meant predator activity, weather disturbance, any number of things. Or it meant human movement, sustained, extended human movement through a forested approach corridor, the kind of movement that would disturb not one species but multiple species simultaneously. The kind of movement that would take weeks to complete because it was being done in carefully controlled increments. At night, in small groups, specifically to avoid triggering any single dramatic observation that would raise an alarm. The kind of movement that a threat assessment would never catch because threat assessments looks for concentrated activity, not distributed patience. Mitchell put the log down. He picked up the radio. Carter. Her voice came back immediately, as if she had been holding the radio in her hand the whole time. Still hear the day 11 observation log, Vega's entry. Birds flushing from the northeast tree line. A pause. 2 seconds. 3. I saw that entry, she said. I asked Torres to pull the logs an hour ago. Mitchell felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the Montana night. She had been here for less than 12 hours. She had identified the same thing he was only now finding, and she had found it an hour ago, while she was simultaneously lying motionless in an observation position on a ridge in the dark. What else, he said. His voice came out flatter than he intended. Day 4, she said. The livestock entry. And day 7, 6 consecutive nights with no movement on a road that previously showed consistent late evening traffic. That's not seasonal variation, Mitchell. Seasonal variation is gradual. 6 nights to 0 is a cutoff. Someone told those civilians to stop using that road. The cold thing moved through him again. Why didn't you say all this when you talked to the major this afternoon? I did, she said. I told him the civilian pattern was abnormal. He said the threat assessment was low. Yeah, Mitchell exhaled. Yeah, he told me the same thing when I set it up 3 months ago. There was a silence on the radio. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens when 2 people are looking at the same truth from different angles, and neither one of them is happy about what they're seeing. Mitchell, she said.
Yeah.
The darkness on the promontory. I said it had been changing shape. A pause, it just stopped changing. He went very still. What does that mean? It means whatever was moving stopped moving, she said, which means it's in position. The word landed in the command room like something physical. Torres looked up from his terminal. Mitchell met his eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked away. How many, he said into the radio. I can't confirm numbers yet, she said. The thermal is showing heat signatures that could be 2, could be 4. The promontory face is blocking part of my sight line. I need another 12 minutes to get a full read. 12 minutes. 11 now. Mitchell put the radio down on the table. He looked at Torres. Get me Brennan on the eastern wall. Torres was already reaching for the secondary radio. 30 seconds later, Brennan's voice came through, low and careful, the voice of a man who had heard the tone in Torres's transmission and adjusted accordingly. Mitchell, what's happening? What do you see from the eastern wall right now? A pause, the sound of movement, of Brennan repositioning himself. Quiet, dark. Mountains doing what mountains do, another pause. Longer this time. Wait. Brennan, there's something wrong with the eastern perimeter sensor. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Wrong how? It's not reading, Brennan said. The motion sensor on the eastern approach, it went dark about. The sound of him checking something about 40 minutes ago. I thought it was a battery issue. Torres, did we get a maintenance flag on eastern sensor grid? Torres checked his terminal. His face went a specific kind of still that Mitchell recognized immediately. No maintenance flag, Torres said quietly. No flag at all. It just stopped reporting. Someone turned it off, Mitchell said. Nobody in the room contradicted him. Because sensors don't fail silently. They fail loudly with error codes and alerts and flags that show up on Torres's terminal and wake up whoever is on duty. A sensor that stops reporting without any of that doesn't have a battery issue. A sensor that stops reporting without any of that has been disabled. From the outside, Mitchell grabbed the radio. Carter, still here. Our eastern approach sensor went dark 40 minutes ago. There was a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, Mitchell understood something he had been refusing to understand for the last hour and a half. He understood it completely, with the specific clarity that only arrives when all the alternatives have finally been eliminated. They're already past the eastern perimeter, Olivia said. Not a question, a statement. Flat and certain and terrible in its accuracy. Mitchell listened to me carefully. The promontory position is their support element. It's not the attack, it's the cover for the attack. The main element is already inside your sensor line on the eastern approach. They've been moving since. She paused, calculating. Since before I landed. This started before I got here. Mitchell was already moving toward the door. How long, he said. They need to get into firing position, she said, which means they need to get to the base of the eastern wall. From the sensor line, at careful movement speed in the dark, a pause that felt like a blade, 20 minutes. Maybe less if they're already pushing. Mitchell stopped in the doorway. He turned back to Torres. Sound the alarm, he said. Torres reached for the panel. Wait, Olivia's voice came through, sharp and immediate. Don't. Mitchell froze. Carter's, if you sound the alarm right now, the promontory element opens fire immediately, she said. You will have 32 people moving in the dark toward defensive positions, while an enemy machine gun team with a clear sight line to your eastern wall, your generator, and your antenna tears them apart. You need to get people into position quietly. No alarm. Silent movement. And you need to give me time to take the promontory element off the board before anyone starts moving in the open. The command room was completely silent. Torres had his hand on the alarm panel. Mitchell looked at him. How long, Mitchell said into the radio, do you need? 8 minutes, she said. Get your people moving right now, quietly, into covered positions. Not the eastern wall, that's the kill zone. Get them into the supply building, the armory, and the command structure. Covered positions with sight lines. Brennan stays on the eastern wall, but he goes low and he stays low and he does not fire until I tell him to. Then give me 8 minutes. And if the ground element reaches the wall in less than 8 minutes, a pause. Then Brennan opens fire and I take the promontory the second I hear the first shot, she said. But Mitchell, if you move your people into the open right now without taking that support position down first, you're going to lose people that you don't have to lose. Let me do what I came here to do. 32 soldiers, 72 hours until extraction, and an enemy that had been patient enough to spend 2 weeks getting into position without triggering a single definitive alert. 8 minutes. Mitchell made the decision. Torres, he said. No alarm. Get me every squad leader on silence channel. Right now. Torres's hands moved, and the next 8 minutes began. What happened in those 8 minutes would later be described in the official after-action report. In old military language units reposition, personnel accounted for. Defensive posture adjusted, but the language of official reports is always a translation. A reduction of something enormous and human into something manageable and bureaucratic. What actually happened was this: Mitchell moved through that outpost like a man possessed by the specific grace of someone who has finally, completely stopped doubting. He went from building to building, from bunk to bunk, touching shoulders, speaking directly into ears, his voice so low and so certain that men woke from sleep and moved without question, without hesitation, following him because he moved like someone who knew exactly where the danger was. Supply building, go, don't run, walk, armory. Two of you, cover the south window. Brennan, you hear me? Eastern wall, go flat. Stay down. Do not move until you hear from me. Brennan's voice came back immediately, flat. Private First Class Aiden Cross was awake when Mitchell came to his bunk. He had not been able to sleep either, had been lying in the dark thinking about what Corporal Vega had told him that afternoon, about the sound the mountain had made that wasn't the right sound, and about Captain Carter walking past all of them with that focused, unhurried certainty, and about his sister Marina back in Dayton, who always knew things about patients that the senior nurses didn't trust because she was 25 and new and didn't look the part. He was awake and sitting up when Mitchell touched the doorframe. Cross, armory now. Cross was on his feet in 4 seconds. He passed Corporal Vega in the corridor, both of them moving in the same direction, and Vega looked at him with wide eyes that said everything without saying anything. She was right, Cross breathed. Move, Vega said. In her observation position, Olivia was counting. She had been counting since the moment the promontory darkness stopped moving, building a picture with nothing but time, thermal imaging, and the accumulated knowledge of a decade spent learning how human beings behave when they believe they are hidden and safe and in control. 2 heat signatures confirmed now, both on the upper promontory face, using the rock formation as cover, positioned with what she estimated was a heavy machine gun based on the way the silhouettes were distributed, one on the weapon, one feeding. A 2-person crew was the minimum for the kind of sustained suppressive fire that would be needed to cover a ground assault on the eastern wall. A 3rd signature appeared. She adjusted, recalculated. The 3rd signature was slightly elevated from the other 2, elevated and slightly offset, with a different posture, more upright, less prone. A communication element. Someone directing the operation, coordinating the timing between the support position and the ground assault element. That was the one she needed to take last, not first. First, you take the weapon. Second, you take the support. Third, you take the command, because if you take the command first, the weapon fires on instinct, uncoordinated, panicked, but still firing, and a panicked machine gun is still a machine gun. But if you take the weapon first, then the support, the command element, has nothing to coordinate, no firepower to direct, and the ground assault loses its cover simultaneously with losing its direction. 3 targets, 3 shots, in a specific order, at a distance of just over 1,100 meters, in a crosswind that had shifted 4 degrees in the last hour and would need to be compensated for in real time. She had done harder, not many times. She settled the rifle, adjusted her breathing, and waited for Mitchell's signal. Carter, his voice came through low and steady. People are in position. Brennan is flat on the eastern wall. You have a pause. 6 minutes ago, you said 8 minutes. You have 2 left. I know, she said. I'm ready. What do you need from me? She thought about that for exactly 1 second. Nothing, she said. Just stay off the radio until I tell you it's done. A pause. Mitchell?
Yeah, you did the right thing.
Getting people into position the way you did. You did it right. She heard something in the silence that followed, something she hadn't expected to hear from him. Something that sounded almost like a man who had just been handed back a version of himself he had been close to losing. Take the shot, he said quietly. She went still. Outside the outpost in the cold dark of 1:47 a.m., the ground element that had been crawling toward the eastern wall for the last 2 hours was 30 meters from the base of the structure. Their team leader had one eye on his watch and one hand on his radio, waiting for the signal from the promontory that would tell him to move. The signal was supposed to come at 2:00 a.m., 13 minutes from now. He had run this operation in his head 100 times. He knew the sensor was down. He knew the observation post had no sight lines to the approach corridor. He knew the promontory team had a clear line on every exposed position in the outpost. He had been patient for 2 weeks. He could be patient for 13 more minutes. He did not know about the woman on the opposite ridge. He did not know that she had been watching the promontory for 7 hours. He did not know that she had already made her calculations. He did not know that she had already chosen her order. The first shot, when it came, was the only sound in 1,100 meters of mountain night. It was followed in a rhythm so precise it sounded almost mechanical by a second shot, and then a third. In the after-action report, the official language described the elimination of the promontory support element in a manner that was clinical and accurate, and said almost nothing about what it actually felt like to be inside the outpost in those 3 seconds. What it actually felt like was this: the world held its breath. 3 beats. And then, instead of the explosion of coordinated fire that should have come, that had been calculated to come, that the entire enemy operation had been built around, there was silence. Brennan heard it from the eastern wall. 3 shots from the opposite ridge, and then silence where an eruption should have been, and the silence was so loud he felt it in his chest. "Mitchell," he said into his radio, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 shots from Carter's position. No response fire from the promontory. I say again, no response fire. Mitchell, in the command room with Torres, closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Ground element," he said. "Brennan, do you have his on?" "Movement," Brennan said. "Base of the eastern wall. They're there, Mitchell. At least 6, maybe 8. They were waiting for the signal that just never came." And here was the thing about a ground assault element that has been trained to move on a specific signal at a specific time. When the signal doesn't come, there are 2 possible responses. The disciplined response is to hold position and wait for new orders from the command element. The human response, the response of 8 people who have just heard 3 shots from an unexpected direction, who know their support position has gone silent, who are 30 meters from their objective and completely exposed, is something quite different. It is the response of people who realize, in one cold and terrible instant, that the operation they were certain about has just come apart. "They're moving," Brennan said. "Mitchell, they're pulling back." "Don't let them go," Mitchell said, and his voice was the voice of a commander who has made a decision and is already 3 steps past the doubt. "Brennan, Vega, cross eastern wall now. Move." Vega and Cross were already moving before he finished the sentence. They came off the armory doorway at a run, covering the distance to the eastern wall in the time it takes to stop being afraid and start being something more useful than afraid, and they hit the wall and came up. And Brennan was already directing left 12 meters. They're in the brush line, and what happened next was not the catastrophic assault that had been planned for weeks, but something much messier and louder and more confused and ultimately, decisively, more survivable. The ground element, without their support fire, without their command coordination, without the overwhelming advantage they had built this entire operation around, was 8 people in the dark against a defended position that was no longer blind to them. It lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, Mitchell walked to the eastern wall, stepped through the gap where the gate had been, and stood in the cold Montana air and breathed. He was not a man given to visible emotion. He had built a career on not showing it. But standing there in the dark, with the sounds of the engagement settling into silence around him, with the full picture of what had almost happened assembling itself in his mind, what would have happened if he hadn't made that phone call, if he hadn't pulled those logs, if he had hit the alarm button the way every instinct told him to, he felt something move through him that he didn't have a precise military term for. Relief was part of it, not the largest part. The largest part was something closer to reckoning. Brennan appeared at his shoulder. Brennan, who had been in enough situations to know when not to talk, stood quietly for a moment. "Cross took a graze," he said finally. "Left arm. He's fine." Mitchell nodded. "Vega?" "Shaken but good. He's actually standing pretty straight for a kid who just did his first real engagement." Mitchell nodded again. "The promontory," he said. "Carter called it in," Brennan said. 3 for 3. From 1,100 meters, in a crosswind, at night, with thermal optics. A pause. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Ryan. I've met maybe 3 people in my career who could do what she just did." Mitchell said nothing. Brennan waited. "I threw her orders in the mud," Mitchell said. It came out quietly, without preamble, the way a confession comes out when the person making it has moved past the option of not making it. Brennan was quiet for a moment. I heard about that. In front of the whole outpost. Yeah, Mitchell stopped. Started again. She walked past it. She didn't argue. She didn't make it into anything. She just asked where the major was and went and did her job. I know, Brennan said. She saved the eastern wall, Mitchell said. She saved Cross and Vega and Torres, jaw tight. She saved everyone on this outpost, including me. And I spent the first 6 hours she was here making sure she knew exactly what I thought of her. Brennan let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, so what are you going to do about it? Mitchell looked at the mountain, at the northeast ridge, invisible in the dark, where an observation position he couldn't see contained a woman who had watched all night and seen what no one else had seen and done what no one else could have done. I'm going to go talk to her, he said. He walked back through the gate, through the outpost, past Torres helping Cross with a field dressing, past Vega, who was sitting against the armory wall with his rifle across his knees and his eyes focused on something that wasn't physically in front of him, past the supply building where 3 other soldiers were beginning to emerge, cautiously into the post-engagement stillness, and he picked up the radio from the command room. Carter, he said, then Mitchell. It's done, he said. Eastern element is neutralized. No fatalities. 2 wounded. Cross, she said immediately. He paused. He hadn't mentioned Cross. She had been watching from the ridge when Cross and Vega went over the wall, and she had tracked them. And she had already been calculating the risk to each person and filing it in whatever part of her mind kept track of such things. Arm, he said. Good. A pause. Good. Carter, he stopped. Started over Olivia. It was the first time he had used her name. Come in. When you're ready. Come in and get warm. A silence. I'll be down in 20 minutes, she said. I want to document the promontory positions while the thermal is still reading. For the report. Of course you do, he said. And something in his voice had changed. He heard it himself. So did she. He suspected. In the armory, Corporal Vega was still sitting against the wall when Cross walked over with his left arm bandaged and sat down next to him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the outpost returning to its routines, different routines now, sharper and more awake than before, but routines nonetheless. She was right, Cross said finally. The same thing he had said in the corridor earlier, except now it meant something different. Now it had weight. I heard the shot. 3 shots. Then nothing from the ridge. He looked at his hands. You know what I thought right when I heard the silence? I thought that's what competence sounds like. That's actually what it sounds like. Cross looked at his bandaged arm. My sister's going to think this is a great story. Your sister. She's a nurse. She's always getting the same look. The one that says you don't belong here because of what you look like. Cross paused. I'm going to call her when we get out. I'm going to tell her about tonight. Vega was quiet for a moment. Tell her, he said, that the quiet ones always know exactly what they're doing. In the command room, Torres was filing the first preliminary incident report, the one that would eventually be reviewed at 3 levels of command and would form the basis of an official assessment that would circulate for years afterward, in training materials and after-action discussions. He was 23 years old and from Albuquerque, and he was trying to find language precise enough to capture what had happened in the last 2 hours without losing the thing that mattered most about it. He sat for a while, then he typed, threat assessment failure, corrected by Captain O. Carter, Navy SEAL upon arrival. Observation and analysis of environmental pattern changes enabled accurate threat identification prior to engagement. Promontory support element neutralized at 1:52 a.m. Ground element subsequently neutralized without loss of life. Recommend complete review of Northern Approach Assessment protocols. He read it back. It was accurate. It didn't capture the thing. But maybe some things, he thought, weren't meant to be captured in a report. Maybe some things were meant to be carried in the memory of 32 soldiers who had lived through a night that could have ended very differently, and who would carry what they had learned in that night into every deployment and every assessment and every moment when someone who didn't look the part walked through a door and told them something they didn't want to hear. Torres saved the report. Outside, the mountain was beginning to lighten very slightly at its edges, the first gray suggestion of a dawn that was still an hour away. And coming down from the northeast ridge, moving through the cold and the dark with that same unhurried, absolutely certain step, was a woman carrying a rifle case and a small pack and 7 hours of observation data that had changed the course of a night that 32 people would remember for the rest of their lives. Mitchell was standing at the gate when she came in. He didn't say anything right away. She looked at him the same direct, assessing look she had given him when she arrived. The look that didn't miss anything. Still awake, she said. Yeah, he paused. He stopped. Tried to find the words, couldn't find the right ones, found a true one instead. I should have listened earlier. She looked at him for a moment. You listened, she said. When it counted, you listened. She walked past him into the outpost. He stood at the gate for a moment in the pre-dawn dark, listening to the mountain, which was doing what mountains do after the worst of the night has passed. It was being very, very still. And this time the stillness was real. She slept 3 hours. That was it. 3 hours on a cot in the equipment room, which was the only space not being used for triage, debriefing, or the kind of quiet, shell-shocked conversation that happens between soldiers in the hours after an engagement when the adrenaline is gone and the reality hasn't fully arrived yet. She slept with her rifle case under the cot and her boots still on, and when she woke at 6:14 a.m. to the sound of Torres knocking on the doorframe, she was alert before her eyes were fully open. Captain Carter. Torres held a mug of coffee like an offering. Major Reeves is asking for you. She sat up, took the coffee, drank half of it standing. How's Cross, she said. Arms clean. Medic says he'll have full use. He's been asking about you. Tell him I'll come by. She put on her jacket, picked up her notes from the observation position, 7 hours of careful, handwritten documentation that she had spent the last 40 minutes before sleeping, transferring from memory shorthand into something legible, and walked to the command room. Major Reeves was already there. He had not slept at all, which showed not in his eyes, but in the way he was holding his pen too tightly, the knuckles slightly pale. The specific tension of a man who has been running through the same sequence of events in his head all night, looking for the decision he should have made differently. Mitchell was there too. He was standing against the wall with his arms at his sides rather than crossed, which was a change so small that most people wouldn't notice it. Olivia noticed it. Brennan sat in the corner as quiet as furniture. Reeves looked up when she came in. Something moved across his face, not quite guilt, not quite gratitude, but something compound that contained elements of both. Captain Carter, he said. Sit down, please. She sat. I've read Torres's preliminary report, Reeves said. I've also spoken with Brennan and Mitchell individually this morning. He paused. He cleaned his glasses, which meant he was thinking hard. I owe you an acknowledgement. So let me finish. He set the glasses down. You came to me yesterday afternoon with a specific assessment. I declined to act on it fully. I maintained the existing defensive posture based on an official threat evaluation that, as last night, was demonstrably incorrect. You were right. I want that stated clearly in this room before anyone else. The room was quiet. Mitchell was looking at the floor. What I want to understand now, Reeves continued, is how. Walk me through it. Not the shooting, I understand the shooting. The analysis. How did you arrive at what you arrived at in the time you had? Olivia set her notes on the table. She had expected this question, and she had spent part of those 40 pre-sleep minutes organizing her answer, not because she needed to justify herself, but because she understood that the answer mattered for the soldiers in this room, for what they would do differently next time, for what they would teach, pattern recognition, she said, but not any single pattern. It's the relationship between patterns. She opened her notes, the civilian road traffic, the livestock absence. The bird behavior from day 11, that entry in Vega's log, was the most important piece of data in 2 weeks of observation reports, and it was filed under miscellaneous. Mitchell made a sound, not quite a word, more like a breath that had encountered something on the way out. What made the bird behavior significant? Reeves asked. Multiple species flushing simultaneously from the same area over multiple nights, she said. One species flushes for a predator. Multiple species flush for something that reads as a larger threat, something that doesn't fit any pattern the animals have encountered before. In a mountain environment without significant human traffic, that means sustained human movement through a corridor that doesn't normally have human movement. And the northeast tree line is the natural approach corridor for the backside of the promontory. Reeves was nodding slowly. And the sensor? The sensor going dark 40 minutes before the planned assault time was the confirmation, not the alert. The alert was everything that came before it. She paused. Major, with respect, the problem wasn't that the data wasn't there. It was that the data was being assessed in isolation. Each piece individually was explainable. Seasonal variation, weather, battery failure. But together across 14 days, they told a single story. Someone was moving very carefully and very patiently into position, and they were doing it in a way specifically designed to stay below any single threshold that would trigger an alarm. The room absorbed that. Brennan from his corner said quietly, "They knew our assessment protocols." "Yes," Olivia said, "they did." That landed harder than anything else she had said, because it meant the operation had been planned with specific knowledge of how Black Ridge evaluated threats, which meant the planning had involved either surveillance of their procedures or access to information about them, which opened a question that nobody in the room was ready to address at 6:30 in the morning. But that was now impossible to ignore. Reeves looked at Mitchell. Mitchell looked at Olivia. "You identified that too," Mitchell said. It wasn't a question. "Last night," she said, "before I called you about the road patterns. That's why I wanted the 14-day logs specifically. I wanted to see if the gaps in the pattern corresponded to our rotation schedule, if they knew when our observation post changed over." "Did they?" Reeves said. "Yes," she said. "Every significant movement in those logs corresponds to a rotation handover window. They moved during the 30 minutes when post assignments were changing and attention was split." She paused. They had the rotation schedule. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people confronting a truth that changes the shape of everything around it. Reeves picked up his pen, set it down, picked it up again. "I'm going to need to flag this to command immediately. We have a security compromise that goes beyond last night's engagement." He looked at Olivia. "I'm also going to need your full assessment in written form before the extraction. Everything you observed, the timeline, the pattern analysis, all of it." "I was already writing it," she said. "Of course she was." He nodded. "One more thing," he said. "The extraction. It was scheduled for 68 hours from now. Given what happened last night, I'm requesting an accelerated timeline. But until extraction arrives, we are potentially in a compromised security environment with reduced offensive capacity." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you to stay active." "I never planned to do anything else," she said. She got up, collected her notes, and walked out of the command room into the main corridor of the outpost. The morning had arrived fully now, gray and cold and very clear. The kind of Montana morning that made everything look like it had been cut out with scissors and placed very precisely against the sky. She stood for a moment outside the command room door, just breathing, letting the 3 hours of sleep and the 6 hours of tension and the weight of the night settle into whatever place in her body such things went. That was when Cross found her. He was walking carefully, his left arm in a field dressing, his jacket draped over his shoulders because he couldn't get it on properly with the bandaging. He looked younger in daylight than he had looked in the dark of the armory, which was usually how it went. Combat had a way of aging people in the moment and then returning them to themselves afterwards, sometimes more completely and sometimes less. He stopped in front of her. He looked like he had been rehearsing something and had now forgotten all of it. "Captain Carter," he said. "Cross," she looked at his arm. "How does it feel?" "Medic says I'll be fine." "Good." He stood there for another moment. Then he said, "I wanted to say thank you. I know that's..." He stopped. "I know that's probably not the right word. I don't know what the right word is." "Thank you is fine," she said. "If the promontory position had opened fire when we went over that wall..." He stopped again, swallowed. "I had a friend in basic. Danny Ochoa, he's got a wife and a daughter who's going to be 2 years old next month. He's right here in this outpost. And last night when we went over that wall, I was thinking about him, about his daughter, about how close he managed it. You took 3 shots in the dark from 1,100 meters. And because of those 3 shots, Danny Ochoa is going to be at his daughter's birthday party." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. "Go see Danny Ochoa," she said quietly. "Right now, go find him and tell him what you just told me." Cross blinked. "What?" "Tell him you were thinking about his daughter when you went over that wall. Tell him." She held his gaze. "Those are words people need to hear while there's still time to hear them. Don't carry them by yourself." He looked at her with an expression she recognized, the expression of someone who has just received a piece of wisdom disguised as simple instruction and has understood both layers simultaneously. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He went to find Danny Ochoa. Olivia went to find Mitchell. She found him at the eastern wall alone, standing at the point where the gate had been before the engagement had taken part of the frame with it. He was looking at the ground, and she knew before she got to him that he was looking at the specific patch of earth where the ground element had reached before being turned back the last few meters of an approach that had taken 2 weeks to prepare and 11 minutes to destroy. He heard her coming. He didn't turn around immediately. "I've been standing here for an hour," he said, "thinking about what I should have done." She stood next to him, not quite beside him, slightly behind, in the way of someone who knows the other person needs the space in front of them. "What conclusion have you reached?" she said. "About 12 different conclusions," he said, none of them comfortable. He was quiet for a moment. "Then the rotation schedule." "They had our rotation schedule." "Yes. We've used the same rotation pattern for 4 months. "That's on me," he said. It wasn't self-pity. It was the flat, direct acknowledgement of a man taking inventory of his own failures with this AC applied to everything else. "I set that schedule. I never varied it because it worked logistically, and I didn't see a reason to make things harder for the men." "Predictability is a vulnerability," she said. "Most outpost commanders make the same calculation you made." "It's not," he said quietly. Not harshly, just firmly. "Don't make it easier than it is. I know what you're doing and I appreciate it, and I don't need it right now. Let me see it clearly." She stopped. He turned and looked at her. "You came here yesterday," he said, "and in 6 hours you saw everything I'd been missing for 4 months. You didn't announce it. You didn't make it about me. You just started working." He paused. "And I threw your rifle case in the mud." "I know," she said. "In front of everyone." "I know." "Why didn't you?" He stopped. "Started differently. Most people would have fought back. Most people in your position with your record would have made sure everyone in that outpost knew exactly how wrong I was." She looked at him steadily. "Would that have helped us survive the night?" she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. "No," he said. "No, it wouldn't. Mission was to protect this outpost until extraction," she said. "That's the only thing that mattered. Not what you thought of me. Not what anyone thought of me." She paused. "I've been doing this long enough to know that I can't control whether people respect me when I walk in. I can only control whether I do my job well enough that they understand what they missed." Mitchell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Vega didn't report the bird behavior because he didn't want me to think he was filing a bad observation. I know. He didn't trust that I would take it seriously. No. Which means I've built an environment here where my men filter what they tell me based on what they think I want to hear." His jaw tightened. "That's the most dangerous thing in a command environment. More dangerous than a bad rotation schedule. More dangerous than a missed threat assessment." He looked at the ground again. "If Vega had felt safe filing that observation correctly, if I had built the kind of command environment where a corporal could say, 'I heard something wrong on the mountain at night,' without being afraid of being laughed at, you would have found it yourself," she said. "Yes, probably." He took a breath. "I need to talk to Vega. He's at the armory," she said. "He's been there since the engagement. He's okay, but he's processing." "How do you know where he is?" "I checked before I went to the command room," she said simply. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not respect exactly. Respect had been building since the radio call at 1 in the morning. This was something more specific than respect. It was the look of someone who has encountered a genuinely different way of operating and is trying to understand its architecture. "You checked on all of them," he said. "I knew their names before I got here," she said. "I always know the names before I get somewhere. 32 personnel. I had the roster on the flight in." "You memorized the roster." "It's not the unit, Mitchell. It's never about the unit. It's about the people." She said it matter-of-factly without any particular emphasis, the way you state something that is so fundamental it barely needs saying. "When I know who's here, I know what I'm protecting." He stood with that for a moment. Then he walked toward the armory. Vega was exactly where she had said he would be, sitting against the outside wall, rifle across his knees, working through something internal with the particular focused stillness of someone who has decided that physical movement would be a distraction right now. He looked up when Mitchell's boots appeared in his sightline. Mitchell crouched down so they were at the same level. It was a small physical gesture and a very large one simultaneously. "Corporal," he said, "Sergeant." Vega's voice was careful. "The Day 11 observation log," Mitchell said. "The bird behavior entry." Vega's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You filed it under miscellaneous," Mitchell said, "because you didn't think I'd take it seriously." A pause. "I wasn't sure what it was." "You were sure enough to hear it. You were sure enough to notice it was wrong." Mitchell held his gaze. "Why didn't you file it as a potential threat indicator?" The answer was in Vega's face before it came out of his mouth. And both of them knew it, and the knowing made it both easier and harder to say. Because last month Vega said carefully, I flagged an unusual sound from the Western approach. You told me the Western approach was assessed as zero probability and that I needed to stop filing reports based on feelings. The word feelings landed in the space between them with the weight of something that had been waiting a long time to be set down. Mitchell absorbed it. He didn't look away. I said that, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Sergeant. And so when you heard something on day 11 that felt wrong, you filed it as miscellaneous because you knew what I would do with it if you filed it as a threat indicator. Vega said nothing, which was its own answer. Mitchell put his hand briefly on Vega's shoulder, a quick, firm grip, the kind that communicates acknowledgement without overstating it. That's on me, he said, not you. That's my failure, not yours. And I want you to hear that clearly. He paused. From now on, in this outpost, you file exactly what you observe. Every sense, every instinct, every time something sounds wrong or looks wrong or feels wrong. You file it and you come to me and you tell me face to face if you think I'm not taking it seriously. Understood? Vega looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a relationship that had just shifted on its axis. Yes, Sergeant, he said. And this time the two words meant something different than they had 60 seconds ago. Mitchell stood up. He walked back toward the command room. He passed Cross along the way. Cross, who was sitting with Danny Ochoa near the supply building, the two of them talking quietly, Ochoa with his head down and Cross speaking carefully, and whatever was being said was clearly important, because Ochoa's shoulders were doing something complicated. Mitchell kept walking. He needed to radio command about the extraction. At 9:47 a.m., the radio crackled with a response from command that nobody at Black Ridge had expected. The extraction had been moved up, but not in the direction anyone wanted. We have a situation, the communications officer said, his voice carrying the specific tightness of someone reading words they wish they weren't reading. The extraction route has been compromised. The primary corridor shows evidence of a secondary enemy element that our aerial reconnaissance identified approximately 2 hours ago. We are rerouting extraction. New ETA is 7 hours. Reeves was at the radio. Mitchell was behind him. Torres had his pen in the air, not moving. 47 hours, Reeves repeated. Command, we have a compromised defensive perimeter and a security breach. 47 hours is understood, Major. It's the best timeline available given the rerouting. A pause. We are also alerting you to intelligence suggesting the engagement at your location last night was a probing action. The word probing landed like a blade. Reeves and Mitchell exchanged a look. Define probing, Reeves said into the radio. A reconnaissance in force, the communications officer said. The primary objective may not have been to overrun the outpost. The primary objective may have been to assess your defensive response, your personnel deployment, your communications patterns, your response time. The main engagement may still be coming. The radio hissed. Nobody in the command room said anything. Command, Reeves said finally. Please confirm. You believe last night was a test. We believe it is a significant possibility, the communications officer said carefully. We recommend maximum defensive posture for the duration. Reeves set the radio handset down very slowly. The way you set down something fragile. He turned and looked at Mitchell. Mitchell was already looking at him. Get Carter, Reeves said. Mitchell didn't walk. He went at a pace that was not quite running but contained everything that running contains except the visible panic. He found Olivia in the equipment room, writing, adding to the assessment she had been building since her return from the observation position. She looked up when he came through the door. She read his face in the time it takes to read a word. What happened, she said. Extraction pushed to 47 hours. Command thinks last night was a probing action. She set her pen down. He watched her process it, not with visible alarm, not with the theatrical surprise that the information deserved, but with the quick internal movement of someone shifting from one operational mode to another. A recalibration, a redrawing of the map. They assessed our response, she said. Not a question. That's command's red, which means they know our deployment pattern. They know how many people we sent to the eastern wall, how long it took us to get there, which positions we left covered and which we left light. She stood up, and they know the promontory position failed, which tells them we have sniper capability, Mitchell said, which tells them I'm here. She picked up her rifle case, which means if they come again, they won't repeat the same approach. They'll account for me. The weight of that settled over the room. What does that mean for our defensive posture? Mitchell said. It means the thing that saved us last night might not save us the second time, she said, because they'll plan around it. They'll either try to neutralize my position first, or they'll come from a direction that eliminates my sightlines, or both. She paused. What's the terrain on the western approach? The side I don't have sightlines to. Mitchell went still. Because the western approach was the one he had dismissed last month when Vega flagged an unusual sound. The zero probability corridor. The one he had not reassessed since then. Show me, she said. Right now. Show me the western terrain. They went to the map table. She leaned over it with the same intensity she had brought to the northeast ridge the night before, and Mitchell stood beside her and pointed and answered her questions with the precision of someone who now understood exactly what quality of answer she needed and what was at stake when the answer was imprecise. Brennan came in halfway through, drawn by something in the atmosphere of the room that communicated urgency without words. He looked at the map at Olivia at Mitchell. Western approach, he said. Walk me through the terrain, Olivia said without looking up. Brennan walked her through it. He was thorough and exact, correcting himself twice when memory and map diverged, and she absorbed everything he said without interrupting, building the picture with the same systematic patience she brought to everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. There's a secondary firing position, she said. Here she put her finger on the map. This elevation, this angle, it's not as clean as the promontory, but from here you have partial sight lines to the command room roof, the generator building, and the southern personnel quarters. If you're willing to accept a harder shot in exchange for approaching from the direction the defender least expects, that's where they'll put the support position, Mitchell said quietly. If they're as good as last night suggests they are, she said. Yes, Brennan looked at the map. You can't cover both sides simultaneously. No, she said. I can't. She straightened up. Which means we need to change the game. How? Reeves said from the doorway. He had come in without anyone noticing, which was something he was better at than most people gave him credit for. Olivia looked at the map for one more moment. Then she looked at all three of them. They know I'm here, she said. They assessed our response last night, and now they know there's a sniper at Black Ridge. What they don't know is exactly where my observation position is. They can guess, they'll look for the angles, figure out the coverage zones, but they can't know for certain. She paused. So we give them a position to find, a decoy position. We make it visible enough that they believe they've located me. And then we put me somewhere else entirely. The room was quiet. You want to let them think they know where you are, Reeves said slowly. I want them to commit resources to neutralizing a position that has nobody in it, she said, while I'm somewhere they're not expecting. If they're planning a second operation with a force large enough to actually overrun this outpost, they need to believe their biggest tactical problem is already solved. Mitchell was looking at her with that expression again. The one he had been developing since the radio call at 1 a.m, the one that was no longer about recalibrating his expectations, because his expectations had already been replaced by something more accurate and more honest. You're going to let them come for you, he said. I'm going to let them come for a version of me, she said. That's different. Reeves clasped his hands together. How long to set it up? I need 6 hours, she said. And I need Vega. Vega? Mitchell said. He has good instincts and he knows how to file an observation correctly. A pause. I need someone I can trust to see the right things and tell me about them without filtering. Mitchell looked at Brennan. Brennan looked at Mitchell. Mitchell said, done. She picked up her rifle case. One more thing, she said, and her voice had shifted a half-degree quieter, a half-degree more direct, which meant what came next was something she had been deciding whether to say. Whoever planned last night's operation did it with specific knowledge of this outpost's protocols. The rotation schedule, the sensor positions, the threat assessment thresholds. She looked at Reeves. That information came from somewhere. The room absorbed the full weight of what she was not quite saying. You're saying there's a source, Reeves said carefully. I'm saying the information existed somewhere and traveled somewhere, she said. I'm not naming anyone. I'm saying that when you're building the 47-hour defensive posture, the number of people who have access to the full plan should be exactly as small as possible. She paused. And I'm saying that if anything about the decoy positions leaks before it's in place, we lose the only advantage we have left. She walked out. The three men stood in the command room and listened to her boots on the floor moving away from them, and then there was only the hum of the radio equipment and the sound of the Montana wind against the walls and the particular silence of three men who are thinking very hard about a truth they are not ready to fully confront. Reeves cleaned his glasses. Mitchell looked at the map. Brennan looked at the door. It was Brennan who finally said what all three of them were thinking. It had to come from inside, he said quietly. The rotation schedule, the sensor grid, the threat thresholds. None of that is accessible from the outside. It had to come from someone who was inside this wire. The words someone sat in the middle of the room like a stone dropped in still water. And the ripples moved outward in every direction at once, touching everyone, trusting no one, changing the shape of everything. At 10:23 a.m., 47 hours before extraction, with a second engagement possibly coming, and a leak that hadn't been identified, and a decoy position to build, and 32 people to keep alive, Captain Olivia Carter was already outside, already moving, already planning. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because being afraid and being ready were not the same thing, and she had learned a long time ago which one actually kept people alive. The word someone had not left the command room. It had attached itself to every conversation, every glance, every moment of silence between men who had been living and working alongside each other for months and were now, for the first time, looking at familiar faces and asking unfamiliar questions. It was the kind of word that once spoken could not be unspoken. It changed the air. It changed the weight of ordinary things, a man stepping outside to make a radio call, a soldier who asked too many questions about the new defensive posture, someone who seemed to already know something before it was announced. Mitchell felt it most acutely because he was the one who had to keep functioning as if it weren't there. At 11:15 a.m., he called a full unit briefing. 32 personnel assembled in the main building, standing because there weren't enough seats, and nobody felt like sitting anyway. He stood at the front and he looked at every face, really looked, the way Olivia had described looking at a ridgeline, searching for the thing that was slightly different from everything around it. He saw exhaustion. He saw the particular flatness of people who had been awake for too long and had been through too much and were being asked to prepare for more. He saw Cross with his bandaged arm and Vega with his careful eyes and Danny Ochoa, who kept touching the photograph in his breast pocket, the one of his daughter. Mitchell knew because he had seen Ochoa with that photograph 100 times over 8 months. He saw 31 faces that looked exactly the way they should look. He was looking for the 32nd. Last night's engagement is in the preliminary report to command, he said. You all performed well. We had 2 wounded, no fatalities, and we held the perimeter. That matters, and I want you to know it matters. He paused. I also need to tell you that command has intelligence suggesting last night was a probing action, a test, which means there may be a second engagement before extraction. The room absorbed that with the specific stillness of people absorbing something they feared was coming, but hadn't wanted confirmed. Extraction has been pushed to 47 hours, he continued. Captain Carter is working on a new defensive configuration. I want everyone on heightened watch rotation starting immediately. No solo movements outside the perimeter. All communications go through Torres. And I want every observation log entry, no matter how small, no matter how uncertain, filed immediately and fully. Nothing miscellaneous, nothing dismissed. You see it, you file it, you tell me. He held the room. Silence. Then Specialist Kowalski, a quiet man from Milwaukee who had been at Black Ridge for 6 months and whom Mitchell had never heard say more than 12 words at a stretch, raised his hand. How did they know our rotation schedule, Sergeant? The room shifted. Mitchell had expected the question and had decided before the briefing exactly how he would answer it. We don't know yet, he said. Command is investigating. He kept his voice level and his face neutral, and he moved on before the silence could develop into something harder to contain. That's everything for now. Get to your posts. The room dispersed. Mitchell watched them go. He was still looking. He didn't find what he was looking for, which told him either he was wrong about the source being internal, or the person who was the source was very, very good at looking exactly like everyone else. Both possibilities were troubling. The second one more so. At 12:30 p.m., he went to find Olivia. She was in the northeast sector of the outpost with Vega, working on the decoy position. What they were building was, from the outside, convincing the kind of concealed observation point that a sniper would choose, positioned at the right elevation, with the right angular coverage, the right kind of natural concealment. From a distance, with surveillance equipment, it would read as an occupied position. Up close, it was empty. Vega was doing most of the physical construction under her direction, and he was doing it with the focused attention of someone who understands that the quality of their work is directly connected to whether people they care about survive the next 24 hours. Olivia saw Mitchell coming and said something to Vega that Mitchell couldn't hear, and Vega nodded and kept working, and she walked over to meet Mitchell at a distance where their conversation wouldn't carry. "The briefing," she said. "Done. I didn't mention the source question directly." "Good." She glanced back at Vega, then at Mitchell. "How did the room feel?" He considered the question seriously because she was asking it seriously. "Scared, tired, solid. Mostly. A couple of people I want to watch." "Who?" Kowalski asked how they knew the rotation schedule. "Is that suspicious?" "Everyone was thinking it," Mitchell said. He was the only one who said it out loud. Olivia thought about that. That could mean he wanted to see how you'd respond. Or it could mean he's the only person in the room who's comfortable asking the obvious question. She paused. Which kind of person is he normally? Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "The second kind," he admitted. "Then it's probably not Kowalski," she said. "Probably. Who else?" Mitchell looked away for a moment, toward the western approach. "Sergeant Daly," he said finally. The name came out with the specific difficulty of a word that has to travel through loyalty before it can become sound. "He's been here since the beginning. Longer than me. He was the one who set up the original communications protocols, the sensor grid layout, the threat assessment framework." A pause. "He's also been on leave twice in the last 4 months. Personal reasons. His file says family issues back home." Olivia said nothing. "I don't want it to be Daly," Mitchell said. "He's been one of the best soldiers I've ever worked with." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it complicated." She held his gaze. "Don't confront him. Don't change anything about how you interact with him. If he's the source, the worst thing we can do right now is let him know we're looking." She paused. "What does he know about the new defensive posture?" "What I told the briefing, which is deliberately incomplete." She nodded. "Good. Keep it that way. The decoy position only you, me, Vega, Brennan, and the major know where it actually is. That's the list. It doesn't expand." "Understood." Mitchell looked at the decoy position, at Vega's careful work, at the structure taking shape. "If Daly is the source, if he reports the decoy to whoever is planning the second engagement, they'll send people to neutralize it and find it empty. At which point they know they've been played," she said, "which changes their approach again," which he stopped. Mitchell looked at her sharply. "Which is why what?" "Which is why I'm not actually going to be watching from the position I told the major I'd be watching from." The full architecture of what she was building assembled itself in Mitchell's mind, and it was several seconds before he fully grasped the depth of it. "You told Reeves a position," he said slowly. "A real position, with real coverage angles, that you are not actually going to use." "I told him a position that is tactically credible," she said. "One that any experienced planner would assess as the logical choice for a sniper covering the western approach." "So if Reeves is the source," "He's not," she said. "But if there's any path by which the information reaches the wrong place, it leads to a position that I will not be in." She paused. "My actual position is between me and Vega, nobody else." Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't tell the major the real position," he said. "No, he's your commanding officer on this post. And you still—" "Mitchell." Her voice was quiet but absolutely clear. "I have 32 people to keep alive for 47 hours against an enemy that already demonstrated it has inside information about this outpost. In that situation, the number of people who know my real location is exactly 2. I'm sorry if that creates a command protocol issue, but the protocol issue is recoverable. A second engagement with my position compromised is not." He stood with that. He had spent 8 months at Black Ridge building a command environment where information moved through proper channels, where protocol was respected, where the chain of command meant something. He believed in those things. He still believed in them. And standing here listening to Olivia Carter describe deliberately giving his commanding officer false information about her position, he felt the collision between two truths that were both real and both important and that were pointing in opposite directions. And he made a decision. "Tell me the real position," he said. She looked at him. "That makes 3, she said. "I know. Tell me anyway. If something goes wrong tonight, I need to know where you are." A silence. She was reading him the way she read ridge lines and observation logs and the space between what people said and what they meant. He let her read. He had nothing to hide in this particular moment, and she would see that. "Due west," she said. 40 meters past the perimeter wire. There's a natural depression in the ground where the terrain stops before rising to the western approach elevation. From there, I have sight lines to the secondary firing position you identified on the map, the western approach corridor, and the backside of the supply building. That position is outside the wire, he said. Yes, if the engagement starts while you're outside the wire, then I'm outside the wire, she said simply. I know the risk. He looked at her. She looked back. Okay, he said. It was the most important word he had said in the last 24 hours, and they both knew it. At 2:00 p.m., Sergeant Daly came to Mitchell with a question about the revised watch rotation. He was a compact man, 40 years old, with the kind of face that had been weathered by enough field deployments to read as permanently calm. He had a wife in Spokane and 2 kids, and the kind of record that made you trust him without thinking about it, which Mitchell had done for 8 months and was now, for the first time, not doing. The Western approach, Daly said, looking at the duty board. You've got 3 people on that rotation now, instead of 2. Adjusted for the new threat assessment, Mitchell said. Makes sense. What about the sniper position? Is Carter covering the western angle or the northern? Mitchell kept his face exactly where it was. Carter's positioning is operational information, he said. It's not part of the general duty board. Daly nodded. Easy. Natural. Of course. Just trying to understand the full picture for the rotation. The rotation is what's on that board, Mitchell said. That's the full picture for your purposes. Another nod. Daly went back to his post. Mitchell waited until he was out of sight. Then he went to the radio room and wrote down the time 14:07 and the exact question, and filed it in the log that only he and Torres had access to. He stood in the radio room for a moment. Then he picked up the handset. Carter, he said quietly, here. Her voice was low. She was still working with Vega. Daly just asked me where your position is. A pause. Exactly 2 seconds. How did he ask it, she said. Casually. Framed as operational context for the watch rotation. Did he seem concerned when you didn't answer? No. That's what bothers me. Another pause. He wasn't concerned because he'll find another way to get it, she said. Mitchell, if he's the source, he'll try to get that information to someone in the next few hours. Before dark, her voice was very steady. Set up something for me. I need you to do this without telling anyone else. What? Tell Daly casually, naturally, in the course of a normal conversation that I'm positioned on the northeast ridge again. Same location as last night. Tell him it's preliminary information and the final position hasn't been confirmed. Make it sound like something you let slip. Mitchell understood immediately. A false trail. If it reaches the enemy planning element before tonight, they'll orient their approach away from my actual position. And we'll know Daly is the source. And if it doesn't reach them, then either Daly isn't the source or he's smart enough not to move on it in the time window we're watching. Either way, we learn something. Mitchell exhaled slowly, setting up a fellow soldier. Protecting 32 people, she said. I know it feels like the same thing. It isn't. He put the radio down. He spent 30 minutes thinking about it. He spent those 30 minutes doing other things, reviewing the watch rotation, checking in with Brennan on the perimeter, talking to Torres about the communications log, but underneath all of it, the 30 minutes was really just thinking about what Olivia had asked him to do and whether the person he believed himself to be was capable of doing it. At 2:43 p.m., he walked past Daly at the eastern wall and said, in the tone of someone sharing information he probably shouldn't be sharing, Carter's going back to the northeast ridge tonight. Same position. Reeves confirmed it an hour ago. Daly looked up. Good to know, he said. Easy. Natural. Too natural, Mitchell thought. But then again, he was looking for things now, which meant he would find them whether they were there or not. That was the problem with suspicion. It contaminated the data. He walked away and felt something unpleasant moving through him that he couldn't quite name. At 4:00 p.m., Vega came to find him. The decoy position is ready, Vega said. Captain Carter checked it. She says it'll hold up to thermal surveillance at distance. Good work, Mitchell said. Vega hesitated. He had something else. What? Mitchell said. Vega glanced around, a quick, almost involuntary check of who was nearby. Then he said quietly, while I was working on the position this afternoon, I noticed something. A radio antenna on the south building roof. There's a secondary transmitter attached to it that isn't on any of our equipment logs. Mitchell went very still. Show me, he said. They walked to the south building without hurrying, because hurrying would be visible, and visible was the last thing Mitchell wanted right now. Vega led him around the backside of the building and pointed up at the antenna array, and Mitchell looked And after a moment, he saw it, a small device attached to the base of the secondary antenna, compact and professionally installed and entirely invisible unless you were looking for it at close range. How long has that been there? Mitchell said. I don't know, Vega said. I've never looked at that antenna up close before. Mitchell stared at it. A device like that could transmit on frequencies that bypass their monitoring systems. It could send short burst communications, position data, personnel movements, timing information in packets too brief to trigger their detection protocols. It was exactly the kind of hardware that explained how operational information was leaving Black Ridge without anyone noticing the signal. He pulled out his radio. Carter, he said. South building roof. Secondary antenna. There's a device attached to it. His voice was flat and controlled and extremely quiet. Don't touch it. Don't let anyone else touch it. I need you here now. She was there in 4 minutes. She looked at the device for 60 seconds without touching it. Then she crouched and looked at it from underneath. Then she stood up and looked at Mitchell. Short burst transmitter, she said. Military grade. This was installed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly where to put it to avoid routine inspection. She paused. How often does your maintenance team check the antenna array? Monthly, he said. Last check was 19 days ago, which means it could have been here for up to 19 days, she said. Maybe longer if the installer knew the maintenance schedule. She looked at Vega. Good eyes, Corporal. Vega absorbed that without visible reaction, but something in his posture changed the specific, barely perceptible shift of someone who has just been told that the thing they saw was real and mattered. Can we trace it? Mitchell said. Figure out who installed it? The device itself won't tell us that, she said. But the timing might. If this has been transmitting, it would have transmitted during specific windows, low activity periods, rotation changeovers, times when nobody was likely to be watching the south building. She looked at Mitchell. Torres has a log of all antenna activity, right? He logs the main array. The secondary antenna runs through a different system. Which system? Daly manages the secondary communications infrastructure. The name landed in the air between them. Neither of them said anything for exactly 3 seconds. Then Olivia said, don't touch the device. Leave it exactly where it is. If whoever installed it checks it remotely and finds it's been moved or disabled, they'll know we found it. As long as it's in place, they don't know. You want to leave the transmitter active, Mitchell said. I want to control what gets transmitted, she said. The false trail I gave you to pass to Daly, the northeast ridge position. If Daly uses that device tonight to communicate my position, it goes out as real intelligence. They'll plan around it. They'll send someone to neutralize the northeast ridge and find nothing. And in the meantime, Mitchell said, you're somewhere else entirely. And in the meantime, she said, we know exactly what we're dealing with. We know how the information is leaving. We know who's sending it. And we know that the second engagement, if it comes, is coming with false intelligence. She said it matter-of-factly. But Mitchell heard underneath it the thing that wasn't quite matter-of-fact, the particular quality of a mind that had been running 7 steps ahead of everything since the moment she stepped off that helicopter, and that had now reached the point where all the steps converged into a single, clear, terrible picture. Olivia, he said. It was the second time he had used her first name. How much of this did you anticipate when you landed yesterday? She looked at him. I anticipated a threat, she said. I didn't know its shape yet, but the layers of it, the decoy, the false positions, telling Reeves one thing and doing another. I built contingencies, she said, for different shapes the threat might take. And if Daly isn't the source, if it's someone else who installed that device, then the false trail still works, she said. Because it doesn't matter who is sending the information. What matters is that whatever leaves this outpost tonight leads the second engagement toward a position that I am not in. She paused. The rest we figure out after everyone is alive at 6:0 p. With 4 hours until the window when a second engagement was most likely the same 2 to 4 a. Window as the first, because that was when human alertness was at its lowest, and the cover of darkness was at its maximum. Mitchell called Brennan to the command room. Just the two of them. He told Brennan about the device. Brennan sat with it for a long moment. Daly, he said finally. Not a question. I don't know for certain, Mitchell said. But the evidence is pointing there. Brennan put his hands flat on the table. He was quiet for a while, and in the quietness, Mitchell could see him doing what he himself had done, working through the weight of it, The specific damage that comes from discovering that someone you trusted might have been the instrument of that trust's violation. Brennan and Daly had known each other for 6 years, had deployed together twice, had been to each other's homes. What do? Brennan said. We let the plan run, Mitchell said. We don't touch Daly. We don't change anything that he can observe. We let whatever information he sends tonight be the false trail, and then we survive the engagement, and then we let command handle the rest. And if I'm wrong about him, Brennan said, then we've lost nothing but one night of watching someone who didn't do anything, Mitchell said, and we've still survived the engagement. Brennan nodded slowly. And Cross? Vega? No, Mitchell said, and they don't, not until after. Brennan absorbed that. The specific weight of carrying a secret that contained another person's guilt or innocence and being unable to resolve it one way or the other until events made it impossible to deny. Okay, at 8:30 p, Olivia found Cross near the supply building. He was on watch rotation, but his post had a quieter angle for another 20 minutes, and he was using those 20 minutes to write something in a small notebook that he put away when he heard her coming. Captain, he said, how's the arm? Good, stiff, but good. She stood near him for a moment, not quite side by side the way she always positioned herself, slightly angled, always with a sight line that covered the relevant ground. You talked to Ochoa, she said. Yeah. He smiled, and it was a complicated smile, the kind that has grief underneath the warmth, but carries the warmth anyway, because that's what the situation calls for. He cried a little. Don't tell him I told you. Noted. He said. Cross paused. He said he was going to name his next kid after me if it's a boy. He laughed quietly. I told him that was way too much pressure. It's not, she said. He looked at her. A person who thinks about protecting someone else's child when they go over a wall in the dark, she said, is exactly the kind of person who deserves to have their name carried forward. She said it quietly, without ceremony, the way she said everything that mattered. Cross was quiet for a moment. Are you scared? He said. About tonight? She considered the question. She gave it the same honest attention she gave every question. Yes, she said, of course. He looked surprised. You don't seem. Being afraid and letting fear change what you do are different things, she said. I've been afraid in every engagement I've ever been in. The fear is part of the information. It tells you the stakes are real. You use it, she paused. The day I stop being afraid is the day I start making mistakes. He thought about that. My sergeant back in basic said slowly. He used to say that fear was the enemy. Your sergeant back in basic was wrong, she said, and she said it without malice, just with the flat certainty of someone correcting a fact. Fear is the signal. The enemy is whatever's on the other side of that ridge. At 10:00 p.m., she went outside the wire. Mitchell watched her go from the eastern wall. She moved through the darkness with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything, and within 40 seconds, she had disappeared into the terrain, absorbed by the night so completely that if he hadn't known exactly where she was headed, he would never have found her. He stood at the wall for a moment after she was gone. Brennan came up beside him. She's out, Mitchell said. I know. If something goes wrong, she knows what she's doing, Brennan said. I know she does. Mitchell gripped the wall. That's not the same thing as nothing going wrong. At 11:47 p.m., Torres flagged something on the secondary communications monitor, a brief burst transmission from the south building antenna lasting 0.3 seconds on a frequency outside their standard operating range. He radioed Mitchell immediately. It just transmitted, Torres said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone reporting something they had hoped wouldn't happen. 11:47 p.m. duration, 0.3 seconds. Mitchell closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Log it, he said. Touch the device. Don't let anyone know we flagged it. Yes, Sergeant. He picked up the radio for Olivia Carter. The device just transmitted. 11:47. Her voice came back calm and immediate. Understood. They have the false position now. Whatever's coming tonight is coming for the northeast ridge. Yes, she said. Which means it's coming from the west. A pause. I'm already watching it, she said. He put the radio down and turned to Brennan. Wake everyone, he said, quietly, no alarm. Same protocol as last night. He paused. But this time we know where it's coming from. Brennan moved, and at 11:52 p.m., 43 hours before extraction, with the Montana dark pressing in from every direction and an enemy moving through it with what they believed was perfect intelligence, Captain Olivia Carter lay in a natural depression 40 meters outside the wire, and watched the western approach through her thermal scope. She was exactly where no one expected her to be. She was perfectly still. She was waiting. And somewhere in the darkness between the mountains, something was moving toward Black Ridge Outpost with the confidence of a predator that believes it has already solved its most dangerous problem. It had not solved anything. The thermal scope showed 4 heat signatures moving along the western approach corridor at 12:09 then 6, then 9. Olivia counted them without moving, without breathing differently, without any physical reaction that would disturb the absolute stillness she had built around herself like a second skin. 9 personnel in the western approach, moving in a spread formation, not bunched, not careless, but disciplined and experienced, the movement of people who had done this before and believed they had already neutralized their greatest threat. They believed she was on the northeast ridge. They were walking toward an outpost they thought was half blind. She keyed the radio once, a single click. The signal she and Mitchell had agreed on. 1 click meant confirmed contact, western approach, multiple personnel. Mitchell's response came back immediately. 2 clicks. Understood. Moving people into position, she went back to counting. 9 was too many for a support element. 9 was an assault force, which meant the support element was somewhere else positioned at an angle she hadn't confirmed yet, covering the western assault from a firing position she needed to find before the assault element reached the perimeter wire. She shifted her scope slowly, methodically, the way you turn the pages of a book you have read before but are reading again for something you missed the first time. Their elevated position, northwest angle. 2 signatures prone at approximately 800 meters. Positioned where the terrain gave them a firing arc over the western wall and the southern personnel quarters simultaneously. 2 support, 9 assault, 11 total, more than the first engagement. This was not a probe. This was the real operation. She keyed the radio twice, 2 clicks. Mitchell would know it meant support element identified, second position northwest. She heard, through the still Montana air, the barely audible sound of people moving inside the outpost, quiet, careful, the controlled movement of soldiers who had done this once before in the last 24 hours and who had learned from it. She heard it and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite relief. It was too early for relief, but was something adjacent. A kind of alignment. Everyone moving toward the same point. Everyone, for the first time, moving together. At 12:17 the assault element was 200 meters from the western perimeter wire. At 12:19 a.m. Olivia made her first calculation of the night. The support element at 800 meters, 2 personnel. A machine gun team, almost certainly, based on the way their silhouettes were configured, identical to the promontory setup from the first engagement. Same doctrine, same support structure, which meant whoever was planning this operation was working from a standard playbook, and the standard playbook said you take out the spur first, then you bring the machine gun online, then you push the assault element through the breach. Except the sniper wasn't where they thought she was. She had 800 meters on the support team and roughly 180 meters on the lead assault element. At her current position, she had clean sight lines on both. The support team would take 2 shots, 1 per target. The assault element, without support fire, would face the full defensive response of an outpost that had spent 24 hours preparing specifically for them. She needed to time it precisely. Too early, and the assault element would hear the shots from behind and scatter into the terrain, forcing a drawn-out engagement in the dark on ground she didn't control. Too late, and the support team would open fire the moment the assault element reached the wire, and people on that western wall would die in the first 30 seconds. The window was approximately 45 seconds wide. She had been in tighter windows. At 12:23 a.m., she keyed the radio 3 times, the signal for 30 seconds. Inside the outpost, Mitchell heard it. He was at the western wall with Brennan and Vega, and 4 other soldiers, all of them in covered positions, all of them watching the approach corridor through their scopes. He had heard the 3 clicks, and he had started counting in his head, and he was at 22 when the first shot came from outside the wire. The sound was sharp and immediate and definitive. The way a door closing hard is definitive, not loud in the way of an explosion, but carrying in the night air the specific authority of something that has ended something else. Then a second shot, so close behind the first, it could almost have been an echo, and the 2 heat signatures on the northwest elevation, that Vega had been tracking through his scope simply stopped showing the posture of people who were operational. Support element is down, Vega said into his radio, and his voice was steady in a way that it had not been 24 hours ago, steady in the way of someone who has located the part of themselves that does not shake. Mitchell didn't wait. He said, go. What happened in the next 6 minutes was everything that the first engagement should have been, the engagement Black Ridge had trained for, had built defensive positions for, had run drills around, except that it had taken 2 nights and one woman's complete refusal to be underestimated before the outpost was actually ready to execute it the way it had always existed on. The assault element hit the western perimeter without their support fire. They hit it expecting a half-prepared defense oriented around a sniper position on the northeast ridge that contained nobody. Instead, they found Brennan, who had been doing this for 12 years, and Vega, who had learned in 24 hours what some soldiers never learn, and Cross, who fought with a bandaged arm and never once used it as a reason to do anything less than everything required. It lasted 8 minutes. At 12:31 a.m., Mitchell called it clear. He stood at the western wall in the dark and breathed, and around him the specific controlled chaos of a successful defense was settling into the equally specific and much quieter aftermath. Men checking each other, names being called. The sounds of the engagement giving way to the sounds of people confirming that the people they cared about were still present and functional. Ochoa was the first to report in. Clear, I'm good. Vega clear, Cross clear. Arm held up. We've got one twisted ankle from the approach run. Kowalski, he's fine. Mitchell keyed the radio for Olivia. Carter, it's done. Western element neutralized. Support element down. We're all clear, no fatalities. The pause that followed was 3 seconds long, and in those 3 seconds, Mitchell understood something about what it cost her, what it always cost her to be outside the wire while the engagement happened inside it. She could take the support element down. She could set the conditions, but she could not control what happened after, could not put herself between every person she had memorized from a roster on a helicopter flight and every risk they faced. She could only do her part and trust that the part she had built toward was enough. All clear, she confirmed. Her voice was steady. I'm coming in. He was at the perimeter wire when she came through it. She was moving the way she always moved, unhurried, precise, the rifle case in her left hand, but he could see, now that he knew what to look for, the particular quality of tension releasing from her shoulders. The letting go of something held very tight for a very long time. She looked at him. Kowalski, she said. Ankle.
He's fine.
Cross? Fine. The arm held. She nodded. Something moved through her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family as a smile, the specific expression of someone for whom a very important calculation has come out correctly. Come inside, he said. She came inside. Major Reeves was in the command room, standing at the map table with the controlled composure of a man who has been through 2 engagements in 24 hours and is still standing, which is itself a form of strength that doesn't always get acknowledged. He looked up when Mitchell and Olivia came in. Sit down, he said. Both of they sat. I want a full debrief, Reeves said. Everything. Starting with the Western approach identification and ending with the last contact. He paused. But before that, he set his glasses down. The position I was given. Your observation position for tonight. You weren't there. It wasn't a question. Olivia met his eyes. No, sir. You told me northeast approach, secondary elevation. You were west outside the wire. Yes, sir. The room was very quiet. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who expressed anger easily, or often he processed things internally, turned them over, examined them from multiple angles before arriving at a response. He did that now. Mitchell watched him do it and said nothing. The transmitter on the south building, Reeves said finally. You knew about it. Since approximately 1400 hours, she said. And you used it, he said. You fed false position information through a known hostile intelligence channel. Yes, sir. Which is why you didn't tell me your real position. Yes, sir. She held his gaze directly without apology, but also without challenge. I made a judgment call about information compartmentalization in a compromised security environment. I understand if that creates a command protocol issue. I'm prepared to account for it fully. Reeves was quiet for a moment. Then he said it saved every person in this outpost. She said nothing. I'm not going to pretend the protocol issue doesn't exist, he said. It does, and it will be noted in my report. I am also going to note in the same report that the judgment call was correct, that the outcome was correct, and that the alternative would likely have been catastrophic. He picked up his glasses, put them back down daily. The name fell into the room. "Where is said?" "At his post," Mitchell said. "He doesn't know we found the transmitter." "The burst transmission at 2347, Reeves said. "Logged by Torres," Mitchell said. "Time 12 minutes after I passed the false position information to Daly." He didn't wait. He transmitted immediately. Reeves absorbed that, with the expression absorbing something that has weight beyond its immediate facts. Because Daly was not just a soldier who had made a terrible decision. Daly was 6 years of service, 2 shared deployments, a wife in Spokane, and children whose names Reeves knew. He was the person who had built the communications infrastructure of Black Ridge, whose hands were in the architecture of everything they depended on, and who had used that access to try to get the people killed. "I'll handle Daly," Reeves said. His voice was very flat. "Personally and immediately." He stood up. "The debrief can wait 1 hour," he said, and he walked out of the command room. Mitchell and Olivia sat in the quiet room. Torres was at his terminal, not looking at either of them, giving them the invisible space he was so skilled at providing. After a moment, Mitchell said, "How did you know it was the south building antenna?" "Before Vega found it." She looked at him. "I didn't know it was that specific device, but I knew the information was leaving somehow. And the south building antenna is the only secondary transmission capability in this outpost that runs through a different logging system than the primary array. It was the only gap. You identified our own infrastructure gap within 12 hours of arriving. It's part of the assessment," she said. "Where are the blind spots? Where does information move that isn't watched?" "It applies to terrain, and it applies to communications, and it applies to any system that has coverage gaps." She paused. Daly knew the system because he built it, which is why he used that specific gap. He built the gap into the system. Mitchell looked at the map. He planned this from the beginning. The rotation schedule, the threat assessment protocols, the sensor positioning. He built vulnerabilities into everything he built. "Yes," she said. He was patient about it. Probably months of small decisions that each looked like reasonable engineering choices. She was quiet for a moment. "That's the hardest kind of betrayal to see coming. It doesn't arrive as one large wrong thing. It arrives as 100 small right-looking things. And you still caught it," he said. "Vega caught it," she said immediately. "Vega found the device." "Because you put him in the right position to find it," Mitchell said. "Because you trusted his instincts when nobody else had." She didn't respond to that directly, but something in her expression acknowledged it. At 2:00 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the first engagement had shaken Black Ridge Outpost to its foundations, Reeves returned to the command room with the specific composure of someone who has just done something very difficult and is not going to discuss how difficult it was. "Daly is confined," he said. "Under guard. I've radioed command. They'll take custody at extraction." He sat down now. The debrief. They debriefed for 90 minutes. Every detail, every decision, every moment of the Western approach engagement and the choices that preceded it. Reeves asked precise questions and Olivia gave precise answers, and Mitchell filled in the parts he had seen from inside the wire, and Torres wrote everything down with the careful, respectful attention of someone who understands that what he is transcribing will be read by many people who were not in this room and who will need to understand what happened here. At 3:47 a.m., Reeves set down his pen. "Captain Carter," he said, "I owe you something." She looked at him. "When you came to me yesterday afternoon," he said, and the word yesterday was doing a tremendous amount of work, containing as it did everything that had happened between that first conversation and this one. "I declined to act on your assessment. I told you the official threat evaluation was low. I told you I wasn't going to restructure our defensive posture based on what I considered a possibility." He paused. "That decision delayed our response by at least 6 hours. In those 6 hours, the enemy element completed its positioning and nearly achieved a catastrophic outcome." He looked at her steadily. "I was wrong. My judgment was wrong and my process was wrong. I want you to hear me say that directly." Olivia looked at him for a moment. "You adjusted," she said. "When Mitchell called you about the rotation logs, when the picture changed, you adjusted. That's what matters." "That's generous," Reeves said. "It's accurate," she said. "I've worked with commanders who couldn't adjust, who doubled down because being wrong felt worse than being wrong and then defending it. You didn't do that." She paused. "That's not nothing, sir. That's actually quite a lot." He held her gaze. He nodded once slowly, the nod of a man accepting something he didn't entirely feel he deserved, but was choosing to receive with the same directness with which it had been offered. Get some sleep, he said, both of you. They left the command room. In the corridor, Mitchell stopped. He was going to say something she could tell by the quality of his stillness, the particular way he was standing that meant words were forming, but hadn't arrived yet. She waited. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since last night, he said finally. Since you walked in with that rifle case and
He stopped.
I keep starting sentences and they're all wrong. They're all too small for what I did and too small for what you did after. She looked at him. You picked up your case, he said. I threw it in the mud and you picked it up and wiped it clean, and then you went and did everything that kept us alive. You didn't make me pay for it. You didn't hold it over me. You just stopped again. Why? She thought about the question. She gave it the same serious, honest attention she gave everything. Because the mission was more important than the insult, she said. And because I've been in enough rooms and on enough ridgelines to know that the men and women who need the most convincing are usually the ones who are the most valuable once they're convinced. She paused. You're a good commander, Mitchell. You're rigid in some places that need to be more flexible. You're proud in some ways that cost you information. But the instincts under all of that are sound. When it mattered, you listened. When it was hardest, you made the right call. She met his eyes. That's not nothing either. He stood with that for a long moment. Then he said, you checked the roster on the flight in, all 32 names. Yes. Why? What does it actually do for you knowing the names before you've met anyone? She considered how to answer that. It was a question nobody had asked her before, which meant it was either too obvious to ask or not obvious enough. When I know someone's name, she said, they become specific. Not a number, not a unit designation, not a strategic asset. A person, she paused, Brennan Cross, Vega, Ochoa, Torres. You. When I'm outside the wire in the dark and I'm making calculations about angles and distances and timing, the names are what I'm calculating toward. Not the mission, the people. She looked at him directly. The mission is the mechanism. The people are the reason. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I never learned to do it that way. I know, she said. But you learned something this week. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen anything close to a smile on his face, and it changed the entire geometry of his expression, made him look younger, less armored, more like the person he might be when nobody needed him to be immovable. Get some sleep, Mitchell, she said. You too, he said. She walked to the equipment room and lay down on the cot with her boots still on and her rifle case under the cot, and she was asleep in 4 minutes. She slept 6 hours this time. When she woke at 10:00 with 37 hours until extraction, the outpost was quieter in a way that was different from the quiet she had arrived to. That first quiet had been the quiet of people who didn't know what was coming. This was the quiet of people who knew exactly what had come and who had been through it and who were still standing on the other side. She found Vega at the observation post, the real one, the one only 3 people knew about, running a morning watch rotation with a thoroughness and attention to detail that would have satisfied the most exacting standards of any after-action review. He logged every vehicle movement, every civilian pattern, every bird behavior, every sound that didn't fit. He logged it all completely and precisely, and with the particular confidence of someone who has learned, in the most direct way possible, that what they see matters. Anything, she said. Quiet, he said. Real quiet this time. Good. She stood beside him for a moment. Your observation on the south building antenna, that was the piece that confirmed everything. He looked at her. I almost didn't say anything. I know. Why did you? He thought about it. Because you told me to file what I observed. Exactly what I observed. He paused. I figured you'd spend enough time telling me that what I see matters. It would have been pretty bad if I stopped believing it the first time it was actually tested. She looked at him for a moment. You're going to be good at this, she said. He absorbed that the way young soldiers absorb a truth they've been hoping for, but haven't trusted yet carefully, the way you carry something fragile until you find a place safe enough to set it down. At 1:00 p.m. Reeves called a unit assembly. All 32 personnel, 31 in good condition. Kowalski, with his ankle wrapped and slightly elevated, daily conspicuously absent from the formation for the first time in 8 months. The gap where he had always stood was something everyone noticed and nobody mentioned, the way you don't mention the thing that the room is already full of. Reeves stood in front of them. What happened in the last 36 hours, he said, will be in the official record. The engagements, the defensive decisions, the security breach, All of it. That record will be accurate and complete, and I am not going to summarize it here because you all lived it, and you don't need me to summarize your own experience. He paused. What I want to say, in this formation, in front of all of you is this: Captain Olivia Carter came to this outpost 36 hours ago. I didn't give her assessment the weight it deserved. Several of us didn't give it the weight it deserved. And she did her job anyway, without complaint, without making any of us pay for our failure to see what she saw. She did her job, and she kept doing it through 2 engagements and a security compromise and conditions that would have broken most operators I've encountered in 20 years of service. He looked at her standing at attention in the formation like every other soldier, which she had insisted on when the assembly was called, refusing the position beside Reeves that he had offered her. Captain Carter, this outpost owes you a debt that the official record will not fully capture. The formation was silent. Then Cross started it. He brought his hands together once hard, and it was enough the sound found the others, and they found the sound, and in 4 seconds, all 31 of them were doing it, not the polite applause of ceremony, but the specific, sustained, full contact acknowledgement of people expressing something they cannot fit into words because the words haven't been invented yet for what they want to say. Olivia stood at attention and let it land. She did not look away from it. She did not deflect it with a wave or a shrug or any of the small gestures people use to make appreciation smaller than it is. She stood and received it because it was real and had been earned, and minimizing real things is its own kind of dishonesty. When it stopped, she said simply, "Without theater, you all held the wall. Both nights." That's the story. It was the truest thing said in that formation, and everyone knew it. At 4:00 p.m., Mitchell found her at the map table, finalizing her written assessment, the full document that Reeves had requested, covering everything from the initial pattern analysis on the helicopter approach to the decoy position to the Western engagement. She wrote with the same precision she brought to everything, every sentence doing exactly the work required of it and no more. He set a cup of coffee on the table next to her notes. She looked up. "Thank you," she said. He sat down across from her, not because he had something specific to say. He had gotten better over the past 36 hours at not requiring a specific reason to be somewhere. "The new soldiers," he said, "the ones who will rotate in after extraction, after we're gone from here." He paused. "What do we tell them? What's the lesson?" She thought about it. "Tell them the truth," she said. "All of it. The rotation schedule that didn't change for 4 months. The bird behavior log that got filed under miscellaneous. The laugh at the gate when I stepped off the helicopter. Tell them all of it." She met his eyes. "Because the lesson isn't about me. The lesson is about what happens when you decide you already know something before you've actually looked. What do you think they'll take from it?" he said. She considered. "The good ones will take this. The most dangerous thing in any environment isn't the enemy you can see coming. It's the assumption that you already know everything you need to know. That assumption is the thing that switches your sensors off. That assumption is what the enemy plans around always." She paused. "The good ones will learn to stay genuinely curious, to treat every new piece of information from wherever it comes, from whoever brings it, as something real until proven otherwise." He was quiet for a moment. "And the ones who aren't ready to hear it yet?" he said. "They'll hear it eventually," she said. "Sometimes people need to live the lesson before they can understand the instruction." He nodded. He looked at the map that had been the center of every critical decision at Black Ridge for the last 36 hours, that bore the marks of a dozen different pens and the accumulated pressure of a dozen different moments when what was happening on the ground either matched what was on the paper or didn't. "I'm going to change the rotation schedule," he said. "Random intervals. No predictable pattern. I'm going to rebuild the sensor grid with Reeves after the security audit. And I'm going to build a command environment where every soldier in this outpost understands that a field observation, no matter how uncertain, no matter how unconventional the source, goes into the log fully and immediately." He paused, "Starting with the first day of the new rotation." "Good," she said. "Is it enough?" he said. She looked at him. "It's never enough," she said. "You just keep doing it anyway." At 11:00 a.m. on the second full day, 26 hours before extraction, Torres came to find Olivia with something in his hand. A printout of the preliminary assessment document that command had responded to overnight, carrying a notation from the regional operations commander that Torres had flagged because he thought she should see it. He handed it to her without explanation because the document explained itself. She read it. The notation read, Captain Carter's pattern analysis methodology and threat identification process to be incorporated into standard pre-deployment assessment training. Recommend immediate distribution to regional command structure. She read it twice. She set it down. Torres said, "Yes," she said. "Tell the major I've seen it." He left. She sat for a moment with the document on the table in front of her, and she thought about a helicopter flight over Montana mountains and the 23 seconds she had spent looking at a ridgeline that everyone else had already decided was safe. She thought about the silence that nobody else heard as silence. She thought about a rifle case in the mud and a laugh designed to carry across a crowded outpost and 32 names on a roster she had memorized before she landed. She thought about Vega filing a bird observation under miscellaneous because he had learned to make himself smaller than what he actually saw. She thought about Cross going over a wall with a bandaged arm thinking about someone else's daughter. She thought about Mitchell at the gate in the pre-dawn dark, saying the most important words of the last 36 hours in the fewest syllables possible. "I should have listened." She thought about all of it. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. The extraction came at 9:00 a.m. the following morning, exactly on schedule. 2 helicopters coming in over the northern approach in clear Montana daylight, settling onto the landing area with the particular unhurried efficiency of pilots who have done this in much worse conditions and are enjoying the relative simplicity of a clear morning. The soldiers loaded out and order equipment first, then personnel, Kowalski's ankle prompting a brief argument about whether he needed assistance that he won by simply walking to the helicopter without assistance, which settled the question. Mitchell was last. He had walked the perimeter one final time, all of it, every wall, every post, every corner of Black Ridge Outpost that he had defended and failed and defended again over 8 months. He walked it the way you walk through a place you are leaving and know you are leaving, not to memorize it, but to acknowledge it. To close the account correctly, Olivia was at the helicopter when he got there. She had her rifle case in her left hand and her pack on her back, and she was watching the mountains with the same expression she had worn the first moment she stepped off the first helicopter, not looking at the soldiers, looking at the terrain, reading it one last time with the same patient, absolute attention she brought to everything. He stopped next to her. "Where do you go after this?" he said. "Debrief. Then wherever command needs the assessment." And after that, she looked at him. "Wherever the next helicopter takes me." He nodded. That was its own complete answer. "The new soldiers," he said. "The ones coming in after us. I'm going to make sure they hear the story. All of it. The right way. Make sure Vega tells part of it," she said. "The part about the bird observation. Let him tell that one himself." He looked at her, because if he tells it, he said slowly, he becomes proof that it matters. That a corporal who trusts what he observes can change the outcome of an entire engagement. "Yes," she said. And because he earned the right to tell it, he extended his hand. She took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds and contained everything that had happened between the mud. And this moment, the laugh, the radio call at 1 a.m, the 3 shots in the dark, the false trail, the transmitter, the second engagement, the formation, the coffee on the map table. All of it compressed into 3 seconds of direct, honest contact between 2 people who had arrived at a moment of genuine mutual respect through the hardest possible route. "Carter," he said. "Mitchell," she said. They boarded the helicopter. It lifted off at 9:11 a.m., banking north over the Montana mountains, and from altitude, Olivia looked down at Black Ridge Outpost, at the eastern wall and the western approach and the northeast ridge and the natural depression 40 meters outside the wire, where she had lain in the dark and watched and waited and done the thing that nobody had believed she could do until she had done it. She looked at it for exactly as long as it took to become small enough that she could no longer make out the individual structures. Then she turned forward and looked at what was coming next, because that was who she was. That was what she had always been. Not the person who needed the outpost to remember her. Not the person who needed the official record to carry her name prominently. Not the person who needed Mitchell's respect or Reeves's acknowledgement or the formation's applause, though she had received all of those things and received them honestly. She was the person who saw the thing coming before it arrived and who stayed awake when everyone else decided it was safe to sleep, and who picked her rifle case up out of the mud without making it into a story, and who memorized 32 names on a helicopter flight because every name was a person and every person was the reason. That was enough. That had always been enough. And in the months and years that followed, when new soldiers arrived at whatever version of Black Ridge existed in whatever corner of the world needed defending, and when they gathered in the way that soldiers gather to pass down the knowledge that doesn't fit in any manual, the story they told began not with a battle and not with a statistic, but with a simple image that somehow contained everything. A woman stepping off a helicopter, a rifle case hitting the mud, a hand reaching down to pick it up, and four words spoken quietly enough that only one man could hear them that turned out to be the most accurate prediction anyone had ever made on that mountain. You'll need me tonight. She had been right about every single thing, and Black Ridge never forgot it.